Today we finish up the book of Matthew. And again, when you get to the four Gospels, the end is the pinnacle. The book of Mark is a little shy on information. It's more like one guy said that the book of Mark is a little more like a shooting script. You kind of have to mentally fill in the gaps. And so Matthew gives you a lot more information. And it's funny how, if you look at all four of the Gospels, Matthew is very strong with the teaching. Birth was okay, and here he's covering, the crucifixion really well, but he spends most of the guts of his talking about is the teaching, which is fine. Mark is more of a quick overview, nothing wrong with that. Luke is a little more in-depth, journalistic report. He went across like a journalist, talking with eyewitnesses and things, and put together his narrative, his gospel. And of course, John is actually, he's very strong on the last part. In this area, it's funny that where Matthew is in 3 chapters, John is in a lot more. It gives a lot more information. Well, I should say 4 chapters. But the whole point is that he gives a lot more information. So when we put them all together, we really get a really good view of Christ, his teachings. But here we're having a narrative. We've gone through, of course, this story is very well known as the pinnacle story of what Jesus is about. We had where he goes and has the Last Supper in chapter 26, and then he went on before Pilate in 26, and now he's gone through that thou sayest, which is not him going, well, you said it, I didn't. No, thou sayest is an affirmation of truth. See, it's our faith in him is more important than his statement of who he is. That seems to be one of the things that you see about Jesus is your statement of him is more important than his statement of himself. So we see, even though he does state himself to be, I am the Christ, he said that several times. And so the high priest rent their clothes and they took him out and he got smote. I love the old King James words, beaten. He was beaten by the Romans. And then you had the denial of Peter, where he denied 3 times. The morning had come, and it's interesting how, his enemies will stay up all night trying to take care of him. They rode the rails with him. We're going to get rid of this guy, but we need to do it before Passover begins. So they were on the clock. So they stayed up all night. Judas, we have the story of him feeling guilty. And it says he repented. I don't know if he repented of a sin, or you can even repent of an action without repenting of your sin. But he repented of his actions. He took back the gold. We took back the silver to the high priest. And they took it. And they bought a potter's field. And he had gone off and he hung himself. That's how remorseful he felt. But they took it and bought this field. It's called the Field of Blood unto this day. And this fulfills what Jeremy, the prophet, had said. Jeremiah, 30 pieces of silver, the price of him was valued, and was given to the potter's field. So you're going to see a lot of Isaiah and Jeremiah coming in fruition here in these next couple of days. And Jesus was accused, but he didn't answer himself, especially to the governor. Now, it's interesting, he did answer himself to the high priest, but he didn't answer to the secular governor, specifically to the charges, But he didn't answer a word. He heard all these things that were said. He didn't say a word about it. And that's what Pilate was saying. All these people are speaking against you. Aren't you going to say a word? And he marveled greatly. And this is where they also have the story where there was a tradition here to set one captive free. And he picked Barabbas or Jesus, and he's going to take it to the crowd. And he may be thinking, postulating that they would pick Jesus because he was the Messiah. He was the son of David a few days earlier, and not some murderer, Barabbas. So he asked who they would release, and it was the high priest, and it was all of them who got the people, who stirred up the people against Jesus. See, they weren't going to go against Jesus proper because they were afraid of the people, but if they can get the people stirred up against Jesus. They stirred the people up, and they asked to release Barabbas. What should we do then with this one you call the Christ? Let him be crucified. And this is when Pilate does his famous washing of his hands. I wash my hands of this. Do what you want. I am not guilty of this man's blood because he's innocent. We even have the story where his wife says, don't have anything to do with this guy. I've had bad dreams about this, bad dreams. And so he hands him over, and Jesus gets taken over to be crucified. The soldiers of the governor took him into the common house and gathered him a whole bunch of soldiers, and they stripped him and put on a robe. They mocked him as king, and they beat him, and they would say things like, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they were really mocking him. This is something of a mental scourging that they would do. Then they took that robe off and put his clothing back on him, you know. And so they spit on him and took a reed and smote him on the head. After they mocked him, they took the robe off and put his own raiment back on him. This is a story also where we hear of a person named Simon of Cyrene. He's watching this happen, and he has told that he will help Jesus carry the cross. So you have actually, we always have the not romantic, but the traditional story of Jesus going up the cross. But actually, he had one person carrying it with him to bear his cross. So they got Simon to came. So actually, you would see Jesus going up the hill carrying the cross, and then a man helping him carry the cross. We see where our traditionalisms aren't as biblical as we think. We need to let the Bible speak for itself. They tried to give him vinegar to drink, but he wouldn't drink. Also, when they crucified him, they parted the garments, but they cast lots for the big part because he had this big tunic, which was one piece with a sewn open cover so you can get your head on. Get your head through. They didn't want to cut it up, so they cast lots for it. And parted my garments among them, and in my vestige did they cast lots. We're seeing the Old Testament come alive here. And those of us that have read the Old Testament will see this coming up. And they wrote his accusation on there. Normally they would say this guy was a murderer, and this guy was a thief, and this guy was a whatever, insurrectionist or whatever. Here they say he died because he was the king of the Jews. This ticked off the Jews greatly, but Pilate, in another gospel, says, I've written what I've written. Because they would put, why is this guy up there? Well, here's why he was up there, because he was the king of the Jews. And there were two thieves, one on one side, one on another. Again, scriptures, he was hung among the transgressors. And they started mocking him, saying, well, if you're the Son of God, bring yourself down. And they mocked him. He can save others. He can't save himself. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now. They're just mocking and mocking. And he stays there. And he's there on the 6th hour, which was like noon. And then at the 9th hour, 3 o'clock. And there was darkness that fell over the land for 3 hours. So from noon till 3 o'clock, there was darkness on the land. This is something we also don't see. We have Jesus in the daylight, flashing on the cross, 2 guys next to him, one on each side. And he has this modesty robe on, and, and he looks like, he's just had a bad day. He still has his hair. He still has his beard. And it's very romantic for him to look up in the sky or look down at people. It's very possible that most of this was done in the dark. It's very possible here that Jesus died in the dark, because there was, they mocked him, and there were thieves. About the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land from the 9th hour. And the 9th hour, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken you? He's in the dark. So it isn't one of these women clutching the bottom of the cross and everybody's weeping and staring. There's darkness. And this is bad, the darkness of sin. And he refuses, and they tried to give him something to drink. But the others said, leave him alone, we want to see. So I guess there was maybe a semi-darkness, maybe they could see something. But still, it's not the bright lights that Hollywood would make it. And then he gave a loud cry, and he gave up the ghost. Once again, very popular thing that we say, give up the ghost. He gave up his spirit. He died. And at that time, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to bottom. So now anyone can come in, not just the high priest. And the earth quaked, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of saints that slept arose. And they came out of the grave after his resurrection. So he's also giving something that's going to happen later. When he was resurrected, people were also resurrected around him and got up out of the graves and were seen by many. He goes back to the narrative that the centurion was with him, saw the earthquake, and said, truly, this is the Son of God. And there were many women beholding him that followed along. Among them was Mary of Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James, Jose's, and the mother of Zebedee's children. And when evening came, there came Joseph of Arimathea, and this is a popular story that we know about. He went and asked for the body of Jesus and was given the body of Jesus. They went and took care of it, prepared it for burial, and put him into the tomb. And he was there. And the next day, that followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came unto Pilate. And they remembered. See, it's funny how even his enemies will remember, oh, he said he was going to raise in 3 days. And I'm going to take this as a Jewish 3 days. Jesus said 3 days, 3 days, 3 nights. This is not some indeterminate period. How we can stick with Friday crucifixions when this is so clear has always been one of the things that bugged me. Because he's very clear. There is a precision to the gospel. There's precision to the words of the gospel. There's precision to the Bible. And yet we will take it and make it imprecise for our own traditions. And I think that's a bad thing to do. We need to be as precise as possible. I'm not talking just always being literal, like everything's literal, like God has feathers because he talks about his wings, or God has a right arm because he talks about his mighty right arm. To understand everyday communication, figurativisms, similitudes, metaphors, allegories, parables, conjunctives, connectives, all these things that we use to communicate with one another, puns, hyperbole, absurdism. All these things are used. God is going not just in language, but in the different kinds of language and how he picks words. Much of this is written without a lot of adjectives and not a lot of descriptors. Like I've said before, the first 5 books of Moses read almost like it would to a Nancy Drew novel or some early children's book. And Abraham went up the hill with Isaac, and Isaac asked him. You don't get a lot of descriptors of the story as you would in a narrative, written for older people, because the point is the simplicity and the precision. So we have, after 3 days, command that the sepulchre be until the 3rd day. So again, they say this several times, until the 3rd day. Lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, he's risen from the dead. So Pilate said, go, have a watch. Make it as sure as you can. He almost says this almost with a smirk. He's seen all this is happening. He's seen the darkness. He's heard the words. He was probably there for the whole thing. And yet, or at least heard the stories. He's like, make it as sure as you can. So that's when they went forth and set a seal on it and set a watch. At the end of Sabbath day, now we're talking about the end of a normal Sabbath, which would have been what we call Saturday, from to the end of that, on early the first day of the week, which would have been our Sunday, we have the ladies come over. Mary and the other Mary went to sepulchre, and there was a great earthquake, and the angel of heaven descended from heaven. So they saw this. They got close, and then there was an earthquake, and he descended from heaven, and his countenance was like lightning, and his raiment was white as snow. And then fear fell on the keepers. They did shake and act as dead men. So all these strong Romans, there could have been, 12 to 25 there, to guard this thing. And the angel said, fear not, for I know that you seek Jesus crucified. He's not here, he is risen. Come and see where he lay. So go quickly and tell the disciples that he will meet them in Galilee. So they departed from the sepulchre with fear and great joy and told the disciples. As they went to tell the disciples, Jesus met them. So here Jesus is even getting into the game. He wants, he's not going to wait. He's like 80 miles from Galilee. So this is going to be, why he doesn't meet them there, I don't know. But he says for them to go to Galilee. But he stops and meets the women. Don't be afraid, but tell the brethren they go to Galilee. So they went and told the disciples. But they also, that the guards went and told Pilate. And they said, say that the disciples came by night and stole him away while he slept. Now listen, these guys were brutes. These guys were Romans. These guys would kill you as much as look at you. And you think that 12 little Jewish guys are going to take on, there had to be, like I said, some people say 10 to 25 or more of men watching this. And even if it was 5, do you think that they could really do that, and they would have the courage to do that? They wouldn't stand for him, to fight for him when he was alive, and now they're going to fight to create this resurrection fantasy. But Matthew even says that this goes on even today. So they took the money, and it's still taught today until this day. So even when he's writing this 30 years later, people are still saying, no, you guys paid off. And these guys are sacrificing their lives. They're putting their lives on the line. Why would they tell a fable? Who dies for a fable? That's something that, I remember seeing Josh McDowell in his book of Evidence That Creates a Verdict. Who would die for a fable? Who would put their life on the line for fantasy, for something they knew was not true? It doesn't make psychological sense to die for something. You might die for something you believe is true, but to die for something that you know is a fiction. And so the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain that Jesus had appointed them, and they saw him. And here he gives them the Great Commission. All power is given unto me in heaven and earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. Notice he doesn't just send them out. Teach the things that I've taught you. So much time in Christianity today, we're not teaching the things that Christ taught us. We're teaching the things that theologians and commentaries and social warriors and social Christians have made up. We're constantly talking about the family or our lives or application orientation or what you can take on with this and what you can do and how you can be better, when the gospel is about him and the Father. So we need to be careful here, teaching to do the things that I have taught you, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded, not the stuff that some third party has commanded you do. So here we see this wonderful book coming to an end, and we've gone through the story of Jesus, at least through the lens of Matthew, and it's a beautiful thing to see, and to see all of this go together. So go back, do your grid work, homework, and you'll see wonderful things here, just like you did in the Old Testament. Just keep that rolling, and it's going great. Thank you.